Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Hash, the latest and greatest in crypto, coming to you this week from Jen Sanesi, Adam Levine, Zach Seward, and myself, Naomi Brockwell, and we're delighted to spend another week with you. So let's dive straight into it, and we're going to start off by talking about Coinbase. Zach, I'm going to throw it to you. A bunch of different interesting news coming from there.
It's always good stuff to talk about with Coinbase. They really take up a lot of air in the room, don't they? All right. Well, we were initially going to talk about how Coinbase signed a deal with Homeland Security as part of their blockchain analytics offering. By no means is Coinbase a titan in the blockchain analytics realm. Really, one of the few places where it's not shining of late. But they did sign a Homeland Security contract that was notable for the value of about $450,000 per year. This stems from an acquisition of Neutrino a while ago that ruffled a lot of feathers within the crypto community, given some of those founders' past work for a somewhat sus company. So we'll talk about this first, and then we'll get to the other Coinbase news of the day. I'm going to throw this straight to Naomi. Big story here. Coinbase working with ICE. What do we make of this?
I am always the last person in the room to criticize Coinbase because I do consider them a valuable service. And then they go around and stab me in the back by doing stuff like this, and I hate it. The fact that they're inking deals with the Department of Homeland Security for analytics products, I'm not a fan of that at all. I don't know how much more to say about that. And honestly, I think it ties directly into the other story that you're going to bring up. So I'm just going to go ahead and mention it. Coinbase has also just dropped their lend service. So is it coincidental that the same day that they ink a multi-million-dollar deal with one government department, they appease another government department by dropping a product that the SEC was going after? Very interesting timing there, Coinbase. But Zach, I saw your hand go up. I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I mean, the timing is interesting, but here's the timing. This was announced on an updated blog post from June on Friday. So it was not announced today. Friday was also notable because all sorts of shenanigans happened in crypto lending regulation, with Celsius, one of the more prominent firms in the space, being hit with 3 notices from state securities regulators here in the US. So Coinbase tried to sort of slip this one under the radar, I think, on Friday by updating a June blog post that initially announced the product. We said, hey, we're not doing this anymore. This comes after Gary Gensler apparently issued them with a Wells notice saying, yo, don't do this. And they did not. So I don't know about the appeasement angle, but definitely interesting to see them sort of bending to the will of regulators on this one. I'll toss it to you, Adam, for your initial thoughts on both these things.
So, I mean, Coinbase finds itself in a very different position this time this year than it did this time last year, right? This time last year, they had their former counsel in as the actual regulator who was then making rules that very much affected them. This year, they're finding themselves a bit on the back foot, it looks like. And, I think it is an appeasement thing, but I also kind of can't really hold it against them because, again, they're a big public company at this point. What are they going to do? Challenge the government and be like, hey, you can't do anything to us, when clearly they can. They can do lots and lots of things to them. So this seems to me like, more so than anything else, it's a question of, do you want to be a friend of the status quo or do you want to be an enemy? Coinbase is big enough that they can be a friend, and that's what I see this move as.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hold it against them, but I'm definitely saddened by it because there are so many principled people in the crypto space who do take a stand. I mean, Shapeshift is one company that is taking a stand and has consistently been fighting the government to their detriment, to the point where they actually had to dissolve their entire business model out of the principle of, the government should not have the ability to control this. So although I definitely don't hold it against Coinbase either, but it definitely doesn't make me hold them up as a shining beacon of principle in the space either. But Jen, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, the fact that Coinbase dropped their lend product seems so anticlimactic to this public fight that seemed to be happening between them and the SEC. It is kind of sad. I just want to point out that they have other government contracts, though, with the Secret Service, the IRS, and the FBI, and now Homeland Security. And there was a CoinDesk article that from June that reported that Coinbase Analytics has really close ties with Coinbase's product ecosystem. So I wonder what that means for consumer and investor data that's already on the Coinbase platform. I know they say it's completely separate, but Just curious.
I'll go back. I did want to riff on Adam's thing really quick because I think that is a really interesting point, right? You know, do you fight or do you comply? And I think you know, you look at Coinbase, and the other Coinbase story that we had today was about their prime brokerage offering going public to all institutions instead of just being in beta. And in reporting that story, you look at their filing numbers from last quarter. Nearly 70% of their trading volumes are from institutions. This is not necessarily a retail-driven business anymore. It may have been early on, but really this is sort of the mainstream gateway that institutions are using to get into the crypto sector. So understanding that and understanding that they have the pole position in that in those terms, you understand why they wouldn't want to necessarily run afoul with federal and state regulators over a retail lending product that may sort of just be ultimately a distraction from where the big bucks are really coming in. So I did want to just kind of home back in on that point from Adam because I think it is apt. I saw your hand up, Adam, and I'm going to toss it to you.
Yeah, so I actually want to build on the point that Naomi made, which is kind of comparing Coinbase to Shapeshift, which I think is a really interesting comparison. Shapeshift, obviously a much smaller company overall, but I think both indicative of different approaches that you can take in this type of an environment. One approach is to fight and wind up basically being pushed out of existence as a company because that is the path that, you know, that effectively that takes you down. They can still do their business, but it's business in a way that I don't believe anybody in the traditional world of finance would really recognize as a traditional business. Whereas Coinbase has gone the opposite direction. They've taken, you know, and gone down basically every opportunity that they could to become kind of a status quo mainstream financial company. And I think that that's really what we're seeing here is these two dynamics at work. But I think it's time for our next story.
It is. We have a show packed with regulations and provisions and sanctions today. So the U.S. government plans to issue guidance and impose sanctions to clamp down on ransomware attacks. The Treasury Department is expected to announce the actions this week, which will focus on payments. So the Wall Street Journal reported last week, and they said that additional anti-money laundering regulations may also take effect that will bar crypto payments for illegal uses, such as paying ransoms. So interesting development. I think we all saw this coming. It's interesting that they're focusing on crypto payments when we've seen time and time again that crypto payments used in ransomware attacks can be traced. They're very transparent, and we've been able to find those funds, especially when we look at the Colonial pipeline. So Naomi, I'm going to kick this right off to you. Do you think we're focusing on the wrong thing here? Should we rather be focusing on cybersecurity when it comes to protecting companies like the Colonial pipeline?
That's such a loaded question, Jen, because you know exactly what I'm going to say. Like,
I know.
do you think that we're perhaps focusing on the wrong thing, Naomi? Yes, 100%. So Emin Gun Sira had a great tweet about this, which I wholeheartedly agree with, where he said, repeat after me, stop trying to use the financial system in order to prosecute crimes after the fact. The root cause of ransomware attacks is the weak state of computer security, not the mechanism used for payments. This has always been the case with Bitcoin. When they're talking about money laundering, when they're talking about all these things, and they're focusing on the medium of exchange rather than the actual criminals, right? And then when you think like cash is also used for money laundering, and they're not banning that. Well, actually, they are kind of banning that and phasing that out, but that's a kind of a different side. They're not using it, the money laundering side of that, to phase that out. But, you know, it's just, I hate when they do this and they're just completely missing the point that people need to be beefing up their security. We are living in a completely different era where cybersecurity, you know, computer security needs to be first and foremost in people's minds, and people just miss the point, and then they get into all sorts of issue, and then they ask the government to come in and regulate Bitcoin, of all things, to save them. It's such a non sequitur for me, when really, you know, we need to be focusing on the fact that the government is overly prioritizing offensive weakening of our security systems rather than encouraging business to beef up their security systems. It's all about, you know, how do we weaken encryption? How do we put back doors and things? That's the only narrative we ever hear. We never hear anyone saying, hey guys, we're living in a completely different world. We need to start beefing up our encryption. We need to start really protecting ourselves, because the government doesn't want that narrative. They don't want businesses beefing up their security. It's a lot easier for them to have companies with really weak security so that they can keep getting access to all kinds of information, and then just go after Bitcoin. You know, you kill two birds with one stone. You get rid of security and privacy for the individual, and you also kill sovereign money for the people. So it's just a really sad state of affairs, and I think a lot of crypto people see straight through it. But Adam, I'll throw to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that the credulous view of this is that they don't know what they're doing and they're targeting the wrong thing because they need to do something. I think the more skeptical viewpoint is that the government, not just our government, governments in general in the modern era, appear to be in the business of intentionally looking at problems, picking the thing that they wanted to do anyways, and then using the problem to justify that solution, even if it does nothing to actually resolve the underlying issue. I think you can look at that in the world of crypto across just a myriad examples. And I think it's particularly well encapsulated in this example with ransomware. Again, like these problems only come up whenever there's something that they actually want to do with them, as opposed to because this is actually the solution to the problem. So it is definitely frustrating, Naomi. I can relate with you on that, but I don't think we're going to see anything like this change. What do you think, Zach?
Yeah, I think that is a good summation. I think, I hate to be that guy who's like, this is a branding issue for Bitcoin, right? This is about the narrative around Bitcoin. And I think this is an example of where Bitcoin has really been ill-served by not having a clear, concise brand around why it's a value. And I think what has happened here on Capitol Hill is that the Bitcoin brand has been closely associated with the ransomware brand, and that's a bad place for Bitcoin to be. And now we're seeing some of the ramifications of it. And that's kind of the sad state of affairs of where we are in terms of Capitol Hill legislation. So interesting to see, again, the continued can never say that word, politicalization of Bitcoin. And this is another example of that. But yeah, back to you, Jen.
Well, when we talk about the branding of Bitcoin, Zach, do you think that just goes back to the mainstream narrative around Bitcoin? I mean, like, do you think that takes us back to the Silk Road and just what people have heard about Bitcoin and the mainstream going from the Silk Road to now?
It could be, yeah. I mean, it could be the Silk Road thing, but with a modern updated twist. Colonial Pipeline, I think, helped cement that over the summer. But very curious for Naomi's thoughts on this, just for her historical perspective.
Yeah, I think that it's no different from the way the media has portrayed Bitcoin in the past. Right from the start, as soon as it became a threat, they started to smear it in the press. I mean, it's interesting. You've kind of seen this all throughout history. There are lots of examples you could cite where something becomes a threat and then the government smears it because it's a threat, right? And like, I know Jeffrey Tucker's talked a lot about like the railway analogy, but we won't dive into that. I mean, what I will say is that it has evolved and they're choosing whatever the threat of the day is and they're appropriating it and then applying that to Bitcoin. So early, there was no talk of ransomware at all. It was all about drugs. And it was about like sex trafficking. There was a lot of sex trafficking talk in the early Bitcoin days. And, obviously before that, the mainstream media weren't even talking about it. It was maybe you'd hear about it on some threads. It's just, comical, magic internet money. Let's not take this seriously. As soon as it became a threat, though, immediately it was about the drugs. Every hearing was about drugs. They framed Charlie Shrem as this center person that we need to crack down on. That's why we should have a bit license in New York. Then you had Ross Ulbricht as this center, straw man for this whole movement. And, it's just migrated to its new form. Now it's ransomware. They're going to choose another thing if ransomware gets under control. And Bitcoin is always going to be the enemy because it is the enemy of the state. Let's be honest about that. But Zach, what's coming up after the break?
Let's talk about another front in the war on crypto. Stablecoins apparently are the hot new thing that the Treasury Department and other officials in Washington are looking at, according to the New York Times. We're going to talk about that after the break. Stick with us. It is The Hash. There's so much going on. Yeah.
Welcome back to The Hash, everyone. So we're going to dive into some regulation again. Make this a total regulation show.
Regulation Mondays.
Regulation Monday. We love it. So Coin Center came out with a great article that dives into the infrastructure bill. Now, this has been in the news nonstop, especially in the crypto sphere, ever since we found out about the crypto provision tucked away in there that had these vague definitions about broker in there. But it turns out that's not the only severely problematic part of the infrastructure bill. So Coin Center dives into it. They look at section 6050, which requires counterparties to surveil each other even without an intermediary. So let's kind of unpack why this is an issue. I mean, the way Coin Center says, I'm just going to read their words because they really summed it up nicely. It's also to do with the Bank Secrecy Act, that it would basically say that cryptocurrency has to apply, Bank Secrecy Act would apply to cryptocurrency. And they say, well, the Bank Secrecy Act and its mandated reporting from banks and other financial institutions is a warrantless surveillance regime that hoovers up the banking details of every American, irrespective of any suspicion of crime, and hands that deeply personal information to law enforcement and intelligence agencies without any check or balance from the judiciary. And the whole reason why we are okay with this, or why it's deemed constitutional, is something called the third-party doctrine, right? So let's just explain that quickly before we dive into this. And Snowden's talked a lot about the third-party doctrine, about how the reason that the government can comply, can force, like, for example, telecom companies to hand over a whole bunch of information, for AT&T to hand over information about their data. It's the idea that as soon as we voluntarily trust a third party or another company with our data, then we're no longer in control of that. We've given that out, and so the government can force those other institutions or those other parties to give over that data. And so in this instance, they're saying, listen, because you're using banks, you're using these third parties, that data is no longer yours, it's the banks. And so they have the right to hand over that data. And of course, the banks all voluntarily comply because they get access to banking services by handing over all of this data. Now, sure, we could say that the third-party doctrine, which is terrible and needs to be overhauled anyway, applies to the banking sector. But what they then went ahead and did was they applied this to cash, right? Cash transactions that are peer-to-peer. And now they're saying with the infrastructure bill, this will apply to cryptocurrency. So any transaction that's over $10,000 in cryptocurrency, both parties will need to report on each other, social security numbers, all of the things mandated in the Bank Secrecy Act. And so Coin Center brings up the point and says, like, guys, it's literally called the third-party doctrine. And you're saying it applies to situations where there are two parties. Like, how is this constitutional? Literally, the only reason it's constitutional is this third-party doctrine. There are no third parties here. And so you're literally saying that people should be forced to hand over information about their peers or people they're doing transactions with when the government itself can't even get access to that information without a warrant. And yet we're expected to report on each other. So it's just kind of this complete perversion of the law. Now, this has been there have been, what's the word I'm looking for? Pushes back. My English is really good today. Appeals, that's the word. Appeals. There have been appeals to this where in the sense that it applies to cash in the past, but they never really got anywhere. I think they got to the second circuit or appeals and didn't go further than that. But Coin Center has said in no uncertain terms that they are ready to fight this. If they're applying this to cryptocurrency, they will take on this battle because this is unconstitutional and this should have been struck down as it applies to cash a long time ago. So kind of meaty stuff coming out of Coin Center. Adam, I'm going to throw straight to you for your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I'm not actually familiar with this particular clause yet, but it seems like I kind of need to be. The thing that this brings to mind immediately is just that the Constitution is a document that both empowers the government and then also places some pretty strict limitations on what it can or can't do. In the modern era, the Constitution has been recognized really as little other than a roadblock that prevents the government from doing things that it would like to do. And this seems to be another attempt at that, because to the extent that they do something unconstitutional, but they're able to actually do it and they're able to maintain it, then they can actually weaken the overall protections that prevent them from doing other things that they would like to do. So it's a very unfortunate continuation of trend here. It's really good that Coin Center was able to suss it out. And I'm not at all surprised that Peter Van Valkenburg is at the forefront of this. And I hope that they do, follow this case as long as it takes, because it is an important one. Jen?
Yeah, every time there's a new law or rule put in place in the space, things become more and more unclear. And I'm starting to think that this is happening on purpose. So part of this new provision says that the reporting has to happen within 15 days. And so my questions are like, what needs to be included in that report? How does it happen? How is this report submitted? If I'm taking all of this personal information from you, Naomi, what are the provisions to make sure that I don't do something malicious with that information? How am I protecting your information? There are so many questions to be asked here if this were to be put in place that it's just confusing and frustrating all at the same time. But Naomi, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, well, and then I'll throw it straight to Adam. But one thing, quick answer is I'll say there are no protections, which is exactly why we see when the government mandates that banks collect all this information, they KYC everyone. We have all these data breaches. They put individuals at risk, and all this sensitive information is just spread across the internet. If there are like countless hacks of JP Morgan and every other giant bank. So there are no protections in place, and yet the government mandates that this sensitive information get collected. What Bitcoin solved was that you no longer have to collect this information in order to create a trust network where people can send money to each other. It was a revolution, and now the government's coming and saying, "Oh no, it wasn't that. This was this necessary evil. We actually like all the information, and so we're going to shoehorn that back into our model, and force you to keep collecting that information for us." But Adam, I'll throw that over to you.
So the thing that I think most upsets me about these types of things is that there are already so many things on the books that are illegal, that are not enforced. And this is, if it passes as they would like it to, will be yet another thing that is illegal on the books, not enforced, which then means necessarily that anytime we see it being enforced, it will actually being selectively enforced, where really it's just being used as a pretense to go after somebody who they really already wanted to go after. And this was just kind of the most, convenient cudgel that they kind of have. So again, this whole thing really continues to take us down a very dangerous path in US law.
Yeah, I really hope the Coin Center is able to push back on this. And it is kind of shocking that this cash provision has been in place for so long. When it went to the Court of Appeals, this was 1991, and nothing has happened with it since. But crypto could be providing a new energy behind this, because there are a lot of people in crypto who are very unhappy with this. People should have the right to transact with other consenting individuals. So it's interesting to see where this is going to go next. But I'll change topic here, and I'm going to throw it back to you. What's going on in regulation, just for something different, but with stablecoins?
Yeah, it's all regulation day here on the Hash. So stablecoins are once again in the news. In a story published Sunday in the New York Times, we got to look at both the growing likelihood that stablecoins will be regulated, and at least in the US, the different ways that they could go about doing it. The article postulated that they could designate them as a risk to the financial system, which would put them under regulatory control, even if the activity that they are saying will be a risk is only a risk down the road. They could call them securities, which would then put the SEC in charge of regulating them as securities, and also have major implications in terms of how and who can use them. They could treat them as money market mutual funds, which some experts say they resemble and which are also regulated by a different regulator. They could regulate them like their banks under the OCC, potentially bringing stablecoins into the Treasury Department effectively. And they could issue a competing central bank digital currency, something that the Federal Reserve is currently studying. So the one thing that they know is that they need government approval in order for these things to be things that we can legally use. Naomi, I'll throw to you for this one first. What do you think?
Well, I'd also just like the angle that this kind of shows the zeitgeist, that regulation is on the horizon, because we have a feature in the New York Times. And it also goes to speak for the fact that media outlets, just being a mouthpiece of the state, historically, this has always been so, and it continues to be so, even as we start to decentralize, government moves along with that, finds ways to kind of co-opt the system in that. So it is kind of interesting that this article takes that approach and says, oh, New York Times is talking about it. Clearly they're in the know, and they're setting the foundation so that, government can then go after stablecoins. I mean, it is interesting because we sort of already read the tea leaves on this with the Coinbase lawsuit, when they're saying, hey, SEC is saying, hey, you can't have this lending product because it clearly involves securities. And the only thing it involved was USDC, right? They weren't planning on offering their lend service with any other product to start off with. It was just USDC. So it's like, okay, is this a security? Is this going to be regulated as such? And obviously it's up in the air how this actually is going to be regulated, which department is going to take control. Gensler has been so aggressive in claiming everything in the crypto space as a security. It's probably going to be a battle amongst the government as well, but they do have these, sort of task forces that they've put together with a bunch of different departments. I wouldn't be surprised if someone like Gensler or the SEC kind of takes the lead and spearheads these departments anyway, because they really have, taken a lot of territory in that space. So it'll be interesting to see which government department claims this. Also, I mean, it's so interesting that they say systemically risky. It's such an interesting term to unpack. Like, yeah, it is kind of systemically risky. But I also think that what the government is doing is systemically risky as well. And when they talk about applying protection and they say, well, maybe this should be considered money, and so we have FDIC insurance, and then consumers can be protected. We have to dig into that too, because how much of consumers actually being protected by FDIC insurance? Isn't it like 1% of accounts are covered? So if there is a bank run, FDIC is going to do squat, right? It's just this false sense of security so the government can seem like they're protecting people so people can feel comfortable. But at the end of the day, it's kind of this moral hazard because people are using these risky products under this false illusion of security. And if that applies to the crypto space as well, and people start to think that this is more secure than it actually is because it has FDIC insurance, I think that actually creates a bigger systemic risk than anything they're worried about. But Zach, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about this whole conversation is that, you can't discount the fact that stablecoin issuers in the past have been a bit dodgy as to whether or not there is $1 backing every stablecoin out there in the world, right? So if these things are to become systemic, I don't think they're systemic anything yet. They're still pretty niche in terms of usage, but we are seeing stablecoin numbers in the world rise, and we are seeing more mainstream firms embrace stablecoins like USDC as a way to provide cool, innovative fintech products to the world. There is legitimate questions about whether or not these assets are redeemable for what they claim to be worth. And so I think the crypto industry has sort of a sordid, checkered past when it comes to the stablecoin issuers, and now we're seeing that sort of, I don't know what's the idiom I'm looking for? That chicken come home and roost or whatever. Is that the idiom? As these things become, yeah, exactly, right. So Tether has a long history of this. USDC only recently became more forthcoming about which assets are backing these things, right? As these become huge, multi-billion-dollar pieces of the global economy, it makes sense that someone is going to take these companies to task when previously they had not been taken to task. So, I don't know. I do want to pipe up for responsible regulation or whatever that would be in this case, because there have been issues in the past as to whether or not $1 a dollar-backed stablecoin actually has dollars backing it. Jen, I'll toss it to you for your take.
Yeah, I'll add my take in quickly and pass it back to you, Adam. This isn't surprising if we look at what the regulators have been saying about stablecoins up until now, what's been happening with stablecoins, to Zach's point. I want to point to something that Sam Bankman-Fried recently said. He said that a ban on stablecoins would be sad, but regulation could have a more positive effect for investors. So I think that just supports what you're saying, Zach. And we've said on the show before that regulation isn't necessarily a bad thing. It tells us what we need to push against, and it gives us some sort of framework to have the conversations that we have every day on this show in a more productive way. And so hopefully regulation can bring some more clarity to what's happening in the crypto space, and we can finally start to move forward instead of just spinning in circles. But Adam, I'll pass it back to you to wrap us up.
Yeah, so I mean, just wrapping it up, I think that when we look at these types of things, really what we're seeing here are two incompatible systems that are attempting to reconcile each other and incorporate into each other. On the one hand, you have the traditional state, which is basically saying that we don't want to change any rules, create any new rules for you, or really do anything that's going to assist you in this in any way. In fact, the only thing we're really interested in doing is standing in your way because you present competition to us, and this is a way that we can do that. On the other side, you see sort of the world of cryptocurrency broadly saying that we have a better way to do these things. We don't need the rules that you created for your older systems that were much worse because we've done it in a way that doesn't require those. And so why would we cripple our product in order to come into compliance with rules that shouldn't even apply to us? I think that they both are perspectives that have valid points associated with them. And I think that really that's the game we're going to be playing over the course of this next year. But it's a topic for another day.
I
It's
think
such
that
a
was great
mic drop
summation.
moment. Well
That was
said,
really good.
Adam.
Thank
All
you.
right, unscrew your microphone, Adam, and drop it off the screen for me, please. It does
Slow
not have
it.
to hit the floor
Slow
or
it.
compromise the mechanical integrity of the device, but I need to see some allusion toward a mic drop because that was really well framed. Thank you.
There we
Beautiful.
go. There we
There it is.
go.
Bam.
There we
All right,
go.
cool. We're going to wrap it up. There's a lot going on in the market today that we didn't even get to today. So check out coindesk.com for the latest in crypto news. We'll be back here again tomorrow to talk about what is going on. This has been a great episode of The Hash. I'm Zach Seward. That's Naomi Brockwell. Jen Sanassi's here, as is Adam B. Levine. Thanks so much for joining us today, Adam. We will talk to you soon. And thanks so much. That's it.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.